Hello everybody, I'm Sid Bishop and I worked in the musical instrument retail trade for about 2, maybe 3 decades. I worked mainly at Top Gear in Denmark Street, which has become quite famous in later years, mainly because of the particularly rare amount of stock that we had and the people that came to buy it, really. We had everybody come in. Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, Hank Marvin, Dwayne Eddy, everybody that was anybody in London in the 70s would have come to Top Gear at some point to buy something, even if it was only strings. They didn't always buy guitars, but sometimes just stuff. And it was good to meet these guys, and I can remember sitting down and jamming with Steve Marriott, and I'd pick things up from him, and maybe he did from me too. I wasn't that great, but it was just fun, you know. It was just great to be around those guys and get that feedback from them, find out what they wanted, what sort of guitars they wanted to buy, and then we'd make an effort to acquire that stock, the sort of stock that they wanted, at a good price. Prices now are just out of sight. In those days you could buy a Les Paul Standard for £400, £500, a Firebird for £300, an SG Standard for £200. Now you can add a couple of noughts on the end and it's a completely different business. Before joining Top Gear, I was in a band myself. I was in the Deviants for a couple of years, but life on the road didn't suit me at all, I'm afraid. So I thought, great, I'll get a job at a guitar shop. That'll be ideal. And that's just what I did. I went to see Rod Bradley, who owned it, and I pestered him for a job, and eventually he got so fed up, he gave up, took me on, and I was there for 10 years. And then I went on to a couple of other shops in the area, and then Chapels in Bond Street. I was there for a while, and then I moved to America to work at a place called Pete's Guitars, run by the late Pete Alanoff, who was a big dealer in vintage guitars, and that was in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I was there for a while. But the big thing about Top Gear was the whole ambience of the place, the atmosphere. People would just come in, famous guys, sit down, have a chat, cup of tea. What have you got in that's interesting? Oh, here's this Les Paul, or here's this 1955 Stratocaster, whatever. We turned over an awful lot of stock, and some of those things have since become legends. Not the people necessarily, but the guitars themselves. And it was a fascinating time. And we will never see its like again. It's gone now. I can't really start to name everybody that came in to that shop during that time, because it was everybody. Bernie Marsden, the late Bernie Marsden, used to buy a lot of stuff. It's sad now to think of those guys, that they're no longer with us. Jeff Beck, of course, another one. Steve Howe, although he's not dead yet, but he was a regular customer. And it was good times. And every year we would go to America. We'd go around all the pawn, we'd pick on a town. I can remember Atlanta, Georgia, for example. We'd go to Atlanta, we'd go around all the little pawn shops around the area and pick up guitars, nice guitars, for like $100 each. SG Standard, $100, SG Juniors, Strats, Tellys, 335 for $200. Get them all palleted up and have them shipped back to the UK. And that's where the bulk of our stock came from, those little pawn shops. But things changed. The pawn shops got wind of what was going on, and they put their prices up, and the exchange rate went against us. Well, when I first started buying stuff, it was $2.50 to the pound, and then it went to about $1.25 to the pound, and it wasn't worth it anymore. That was the end of that. And the import duty thing was a big problem for us because we could no longer buy in the quantity of stock that we needed to stock a shop like Top Gear that would have 200 guitars on the wall. It just became impossible. And then a strange thing happened in the mid-70s. The vintage collectors market kicked in. And what had been guitars that we used to sell for 200, 300, 400 quid, all of a sudden you could stick a nought on the end. By the end of the 70s, you couldn't find a Les Paul Standard for less than 2,000. And the vintage guitar market, in my view, has killed the second-hand guitar market, because a young player today who wanted to buy a decent guitar can no longer go to a guitar shop and buy a second-hand Gibson or Fender or Rickenbacker or whatever for 300, 400, 500 quid. They're all 20,000, 30,000, that sort of money, and even more in some cases. And really, a young guitar player today is either going to buy something new if you want something decent, or something maybe that's just second hand, maybe 10 years old. But the days when you could go into a guitar shop and see loads of nice, tasty, appealing guitars on the wall is over. It's gone. No longer exists, and that is a tragedy to me. It's all collector's market now. When I first turned pro, I went to Pan Music in Wardour Street, no longer there, long gone. And I went in with about 120 quid to buy a decent guitar for the Deviants, for the band. And I found a Gibson 335, which appealed to me. It felt right, it looked good, it sounded great, and it was 129 quid. So I thought, that'll do me. And I bought the 335 and I used it right through the Deviants period. And then I sold it, regretfully. It was a 63, it was just like Eric Clapton's that he used at the Royal Albert Hall. It's the same guitar. But we ran out of money and I sold it. And when I joined my next band, I bought another 335 because it suited me. It was a great guitar. It was very versatile. Blues, rock and roll, bit of jazz, anything you could play on those. I was never a particular fan of Fender Stratocasters because the scale was a bit too long for me. They're 25.5 inches. But I've owned 3 over the years. Somehow or other, I ended up buying them. And they're okay. I'll probably never buy another one, but I'm more of a Gibson man personally. And I suppose that overflowed into my taste of what we had in the shop in Top Gear. We tended to specialise in Gibsons, whether that was unconscious decision by me to buy in that stuff, or whether it was just random choice, I don't know, I can't say. But we did have a lot of Gibsons, we were well known for it. If you wanted to buy a second-hand Gibson, Top Gear was the place to go. And we always had a good supply. Les Pauls, 335s, SGs, Firebirds, you name it, it was always there. We had some tellies and Strats too. Nowadays, I still play 335s. I recently had the Epiphone 335 that's just come out. The reason being that the Epiphone 335 is excellent quality, looks right, sounds right, but it's a tenth of the price of its Gibson equivalent because they're made in China. And that seems to be the trend nowadays for most companies. Fender do it, Gibson do it, Gretsch, Guild, they all do it, is to have ranges of guitars made in China at a more affordable price. And in a way, that's kick-started the market. The peak numerically in guitar sales in the UK was in 1977, and it's steadily declined ever since, largely because of the rise in the vintage collectors market, in my view, because to buy a decent guitar was simply out of sight. You wouldn't go and do a gig at your local Dog and Duck with a guitar that was worth £20,000. It's just ridiculous. So what do? You buy something Japanese, you buy something Chinese, Indonesian, and we've seen a rise in the numerical quantity of Asian guitars in the UK market, which has steadily increased from the 80s really until now. And that dominant, numerically anyway, the amount of instruments sold, that dominates the market. If you go into any guitar shop now, I bet you any money you like that it's going to be full of Asian made guitars. You won't see an American made guitar hardly at all. Maybe one Rickenbacker, maybe one Gibson something, but it's dominated by, swamped even by Asian made instruments. That's the way the market's gone. There's a lot of different reasons. The vintage collectors market is part of it. The lack of availability of decent quality used American guitars from places like pawn shops has dried up because they got wise to it and put their prices up. And as I mentioned, the exchange rate went against us. There are all kinds of things. But that's what's happened. And in a way, it's good because kids are still buying guitars and learning to play them and becoming good. And there's a whole new wave of new guitarists coming through, and eventually they'll end up buying a Gibson or a Rickenbacker or a Fender or whatever, but at least they've got a starting point that's affordable, that they can get going. They don't have to go into a guitar shop and think, oh my God, they're all the price of my dad's house. So, you know, the market is still there, it's just different. Of course, there wasn't only Top Gear in Denmark Street. There was RØDE Music, owned by Cliff Cooper. There was Macari's just around the corner, and Orange in Compton Street. The triangle of Shaftesbury Avenue, Charing Cross Road and Denmark Street is where all the guitar shops were. And every Saturday when I was 16, 15, what would I do? I'd go up to Shaftesbury Avenue, Charing Cross Road, and gape at all those lovely guitars that I couldn't afford to buy. One day I could, but not then. But that's where the core of the business was. And in Denmark Street, Top Gear had its competition. As I said, Macari's, RØDE's, Andy's, a couple of others. There were also, because it was the centre of the music business in general, there was a lot of artist agencies, management companies, music publishing companies, all sorts, record companies. There were also recording studios. Next door to Top Gear, there was Regent Sounds, where the Rolling Stones recorded and Hendrix recorded, and the Kinks recorded You Really Got Me. Hendrix did Purple Haze there. There was also Central Sound. That was in the basement below the Gioconda Cafe. And legend has it that there was a hole in the floor where the Gioconda Cafe used to pass down bacon sandwiches and cups of tea. Whether that's true, I don't know. There was also Denmark Street Studios on the other side of Denmark Street, and a couple of others too. But it was the hub, the true hub of the British music industry, the equivalent of the American Tin Pan Alley, which is why it's called by many Tin Pan Alley. Top Gear business was good, I have to say. In the 70s, it was a golden age really for kids starting out buying guitars. So Top Gear opened up other shops. We opened up Guitar Village in Shaftesbury Avenue, Music City, also in Shaftesbury Avenue, which we bought from Dallas Arbiter's old Sound City, which had closed by then. We had a shop in Charing Cross Road, we had a shop in Worthing, we had a shop in Brighton, and at one time we had a fairly short-lived shop in Edinburgh. And we also had a wholesale company. The wholesale company were the importers for Ernie Ball strings, Rickenbacker guitars, Guild guitars, harp tone at one point. So we had our own in-house importer for all of this juicy stuff that we could sell in our own shops and sell wholesale, of course, to other shops. And the business grew. The business grew and grew. But there was a problem. As I said earlier, the guitar trade in the UK peaked in '77 and declined afterwards. By '78, it was found really that, to be honest, the shops weren't doing that well. We were bumping along the bottom. So Rod Bradley, who owned Top Gear and Strings and Things, decided to close the shops and move everything down to the Strings and Things warehouse in Shoreham by Sea, which is where the warehouse was, and concentrate his business there, just doing wholesale. And the shops were gone. But other people bought the shops and carried on. The old Top Gear shop was bought by Ron Roker, who used to be our amplifier repairman, and it was Roker's for years. Other shops opened too. So it flowed on, but it changed. And if you go down there now, there's still plenty of guitar shops there, but they're just different names over the door. That's all. And while I was at Top Gear, because of all this amazing stuff that we had, people started coming in and saying, how old is this Gibson? How old is this Epiphone? Can you date it for me? Can you do me an insurance valuation? And I became interested in the guitar serial numbers, how the serial numbers ran. So I began to keep a note of every guitar we had come in, its age, its serial number, and in time, over a period of years, I built up a collection of what were very accurate serial number lists. Around the middle of the decade, somebody suggested to me, Sid, you should write a book. And I thought, I don't really fancy doing that, but yeah, okay. And I wrote 2 books on the history of the Gibson guitar from 1950. And you may have seen them. One's got a red cover, one's got a blue cover. And they went well. I sold many thousands of those. And I became a bit of a guru. I don't like using that term, but people came to me to have their guitars evaluated, and also to make sure they weren't forged. There's a lot of forged guitars going around too, counterfeit things. Since then, I've carried on writing. I've done a lot of magazine articles. I've submitted pieces for other people's books, like David Plews, for example, who wrote those Burst Believer books, the 4 volumes of Burst Believer books, and a book on Goldtop Les Pauls, and a book on the Gibson ES series. And I'm currently involved with David, fortunately, in writing a book called A Century of the Electric Guitar. The electric guitar was invented in 1928. In 2028, it will be 100 years since we saw our first electric guitar. Not me personally, but other people. And I thought it was a landmark that needed to be celebrated. So I'm in the middle of writing that book, which should be ready, hopefully, in about 2 years' time. It should be out by 2028, in fact, which is when that century comes round. And in it, I'm going to explore the invention of the guitar, how it evolved over that period of time, the famous people who made it what it is, people like Jimi Hendrix and Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck and all those people, the rock and roll era, the jazz era, the heavy metal era even, all of which is solely based on the instrument, or the instrument based on the music. Which way round is it? Is one possible without the other? Would you have had rock and roll if there had been no electric guitar? Would you have had electric guitars had there been no rock and roll? The dynamic of which drove the invention and the evolution of that instrument. It's an interesting point. So that's the end of that story. I've been a working musician, I've been a retailer, I've been a writer, But now it's time to retire, and I have retired. I'm living out here in Greece in some degree of comfort, and life is good. Life has been good. It's been an incredible experience. The most rewarding thing was meeting all of those great players and what they gave to me. Jeff Beck, Steve Marriott, Jimmy Page, all of those guys, and what I picked up from them. Bernie Marsden, never to be forgotten.